Now, for the last 10 years, Congress, given tax breaks to the rich, has forgotten to raise the minimum wage. We are here today to remind them that a $7.25 minimum wage is a starvation minimum wage. We're here to say there's something wrong when moms cannot afford child care for their little babies, when working families can't afford the outrageous price of rent. And that is why we are saying that after 10 years of inaction, the United States Congress is going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour.
All of these Democrats were here at the Capitol rallying for a bill that Bernie Sanders has introduced for a national $15 an hour minimum wage, which is expected in the sense that it is now part of the party platform because of a huge win from the Bernie wing at the convention. Just several years ago, it was very hard to get people like Chuck Schumer to even agree to, if you remember, 1010 was what people were pushing for. In living memory, this is just a couple years ago, there was a huge fight over whether or not Democrats should support raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Now you have Chuck Schumer, Patty Murray, Bernie Sanders, Keith Ellison all on the same stage advocating for a $15 an hour wage, which now bills at this point, when Republicans control Congress and Donald Trump, who's called wages too high, is in the White House, bills are just organizing devices. They are symbolic gestures that say, this is where we stand. Here is something to organize around, get behind, and when we take power, we're going to do it.
Diana Garino-Pruitt would like to know, does the minimum wage bill allow for automatic adjustments with inflation?
Yes, it does. It gets there slowly. It's not like if it were passed, it would be $15 tomorrow. It kind of eases its way into $15. But in the past, they've always raised it and then let it sit there because both parties wanted organized labor to have to give them money, campaign contributions, to encourage them to then raise it again.
Let's raise this minimum wage to $15 an hour, and more importantly, we've got to index it so we don't have to have this fight every 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
One point they made was that when Congress voted for their own pay raises, they indexed those.
Yes, however, under pressure, they have been killing those increases constantly. The Congress hasn't had a pay raise for a very long time because of the environment that we're in, and I don't expect Congress to get a pay raise.
While I was filming, a guy who works for something called Employment Policies Institute handed me a talking point sheet that said that if minimum wage were to go up to 10.10, it would cost us 500,000 jobs, and if minimum wage went up to 12, it would cost us 770,000 jobs, so 15 would be Armageddon.
So when they do these it would cost us jobs calculations, what they're actually saying, I haven't read this particular study, but I've read similar ones like it. What they're actually saying is that under our certain model that we've projected outward that there will be this many jobs, and then under this different model we're projecting that there'll be this many jobs and it's 500,000 fewer. Both of those are above where you are now. So it's not as if they're saying that 500,000 people who currently have jobs will lose those jobs. And so one response to that is, well, a lot of people right now at $7 an hour are working 2 or 3 jobs. And so if a person can work one job instead at $15 an hour and then actually spend time with their friends and family instead of working all night or working 16, 18 hours a day, that's actually a good thing.
Ryan Madrigal wants to know if there's any Democrats in Congress who are basically afraid to stand up for $15 an hour.
I don't. There are some. Like I think that somebody like Donnelly in Indiana is not behind 15. I don't want to speak for anybody without looking up their position. You do not have, all 48 Democrats yet, which is why a bill like this is a useful organizing tool. You can find it at thomas.gov, or you can probably find it on Bernie Sanders' webpage, and then you can go and look who the co-sponsors are. And if somebody's not a co-sponsor yet, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not for it. But it does mean that they were not an original co-sponsor of this bill, and so it would be fair to call their offices and ask, do you plan on co-sponsoring this legislation? So, and that's what makes it such an effective organizing tool, because it's something to ask about and to push for.
Richard Rush says, I think with inflation, baby boomers made more than $20 an hour. And during the rally, they were saying that although things weren't perfect in the 50s and the 60s.
I'm not saying things were perfect in the 50s and 60s. There were huge disparities, but one thing worked really, really well. As the economy grew, as productivity grew, low and moderate income workers saw increases. The middle class saw rising living standards. Two key things were different back then. Union density was much higher and the minimum wage was much higher, and we need to raise them back up.
That's absolutely true. I mean, wages haven't really grown since the 1970s. At the same time, you've seen this kind of rise in angry populism channeled in productive directions on the one side, channeled in kind of racist directions on the other side. But you see it across the globe. You know, the growth in the economy and the growth in productivity has flowed upwards to the 1%, the top 1%. This is all very true, and that has come from the wages of people at the bottom who haven't gotten nominal raises, much of a nominal raise, but have also lost very real purchasing power throughout the economy.
100 years ago, Henry Ford, who you may or may not have heard of, Ford car, he decided that he needed to pay his workers a living wage. Now, you know why he really did it, though? He didn't do it because he thought it was the right thing to do, but he did it because it was smart. He realized that he needed to pay his people enough money so they could buy his cars.
That's right, and so the economy winds up then, producing things for people who can afford it. So, if you're Henry Ford, you want people to be able to afford your Model T. So you hope to boost wages, across your sector, which you hope spreads out across the rest of the economy so that people can afford the Model T.
Stacy Oakes is arguing with someone named Anna about Seattle, where they increased the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. Stacy says she lives there and they haven't lost any jobs because of it.
Obviously, theoretically, if you raise the minimum wage to $1,000 an hour, you're going to lose some jobs. So, okay, the theory is fine, but so far in practice, economists who've been studying this issue and looking for examples of jobs that have been lost as a result of minimum wage increases have essentially been unable to find this thing that they have predicted would happen. And like I said, obviously at some level, you either lose jobs. Let's say it's $100 an hour minimum wage. There are some businesses that are going to hire fewer people at that rate, no question about it. Or you create a black market for low-wage labor, which already exists, obviously, in our country. So you'd be expanding that black market for low-wage labor. But overall, at the current rates, like in Seattle, you're not seeing the kind of dislocation that kind of right-wing economists would have predicted.
So Sam Monteleone says minimum wage is a moral question. Do we want to continue paying people low wages for the sole purpose of enriching a small number of people at workers' expense? And I want to add also, Bobby Scott of Virginia said that in effect what we have is the government, our taxpayer dollars, subsidizing the profits of very lucrative corporations that just don't pay their workers enough to survive.
We should not be subsidizing with federal taxpayer money those that are cheating their workers and endangering their safety. I promise you that we're not going to back down. We're going to continue to fight for all workers in terms of safety, in terms of fair pay, and in terms of the minimum wage.
No, these are workers who are getting they're getting Medicaid, they're getting earned income tax credit, they're getting all sorts of other government benefits as a result of their low wages, and the corporation is the one that's taking all the profit from that. It's right. The Walton family is one of the richest, if not the richest family in the world. Yet the government has decided that we are going to subsidize the salaries or the pay that they give to their workers, instead of saying, you know what, you're the ones who've become multi-billionaires as a result of this. Here's a crazy idea. Why don't you pay the wages of your workers?